The snow was falling sideways in Moscow. February 1978. The kind of snow that doesn't drift gently from the sky like in Christmas postcards but attacks horizontally, driven by a Siberian wind that cuts through clothing, through skin, through the walls of buildings that were never designed for comfort. The temperature had dropped to minus 23 degrees Celsius, and the streets of central Moscow were nearly empty. Those who had no choice but to be outside moved quickly, heads down, collars up, their breath forming thick clouds that the wind tore apart before they could fully form. The Hotel Ukraina stood like a monument to Soviet ambition on the bank of the Moskva River. One of Stalin's 7 sisters, those massive wedding cake skyscrapers that dominated the Moscow skyline like stone fingers pointing accusingly at heaven. 34 stories of granite, marble, and ideology. Inside, the lobbies were vast and cold, decorated with chandeliers that cost more than most Soviet citizens would earn in a lifetime, hung above floors that were mopped 3 times daily by women who earned 40 rubles a month. It was in this hotel, on the 19th floor, in room 1914, that Muhammad Ali sat on the edge of a bed that was too short for him, staring out a window at a city that seemed to exist in permanent twilight. He had arrived in Moscow 2 days earlier for what had been billed as a goodwill exhibition match, a gesture of sporting diplomacy between 2 superpowers who were locked in a Cold War that had lasted longer than most marriages. The Soviet Boxing Federation had invited him. The State Department had approved the trip, reluctantly, after weeks of negotiations that involved more bureaucrats than Ali had ever seen in one room. The exhibition was scheduled for Saturday night at the Luzhniki Palace of Sports. Ali would face Viktor Petrov, the Soviet Union's heavyweight champion, a man who had won 3 consecutive European championships and who was being groomed, according to Soviet sports propaganda, to become the first communist world heavyweight champion. The match was supposed to be friendly. 3 rounds. No knockouts. A demonstration of international goodwill, a brief thaw in the frozen relationship between Washington and Moscow. But nothing involving Muhammad Ali was ever simple, and nothing involving the KGB was ever what it appeared to be. 3 floors above Ali's room, in a suite that was officially unoccupied, Colonel Yuri Andropovich Volkov sat behind a desk covered with files, photographs, and surveillance transcripts. Volkov was 51 years old, a career intelligence officer who had spent the last 27 years in the 2nd Chief Directorate of the KGB, the division responsible for internal security and counterintelligence. He was thin, precise, with the kind of face that people forgot immediately after seeing it, which was, of course, exactly the point. His hair was iron gray, cut close to the skull. His eyes were the color of Baltic ice. He smoked Belomorkanal cigarettes, the cheapest brand available, a habit he maintained despite his senior rank because vanity, in his view, was a vulnerability, and Yuri Volkov did not permit himself vulnerabilities. The files on his desk contained everything the KGB had ever gathered on Muhammad Ali. Medical records obtained through contacts at American hospitals. Psychological profiles compiled by Soviet sports psychologists who had studied hours of fight footage. Transcripts of Ali's public speeches, his interviews, his press conferences. Financial records that detailed his income, his debts, his spending habits. Personal information about his marriages, his children, his religious beliefs, his political associations. The KGB had been building this file for over a decade, since Ali first became a figure of international significance. Not because they considered him a threat in the traditional sense, but because they recognized what he represented, a symbol. And symbols, Volkov knew from long experience, were more dangerous than armies. Ali's refusal to serve in Vietnam had been celebrated in Soviet propaganda for years. His defiance of the American establishment had been held up as proof that even America's greatest heroes recognized the moral bankruptcy of capitalism and imperialism. He had been useful to the Soviet narrative. But useful tools, Volkov also knew, could become dangerous if they operated outside the script. And Ali had never operated inside anyone's script. The exhibition match on Saturday was supposed to be a controlled event. Petrov would fight well, demonstrate Soviet boxing prowess, and Ali would be gracious in the way that visiting champions were expected to be gracious. A draw, perhaps, or a narrow decision that left both sides satisfied. The Politburo had approved the event on the condition that it would project Soviet strength and confidence. But intelligence reports suggested that Ali had no intention of playing his assigned role. Sources within the American delegation had indicated that Ali planned to fight at full capacity, to put on a show, to demonstrate his superiority in a way that would humiliate Petrov and, by extension, the Soviet athletic program. This was unacceptable. Volkov's orders came directly from the top. Not in writing, of course. They never came in writing. A phone call from a deputy minister, phrased in the careful euphemisms that Soviet bureaucracy had elevated to an art form. Ensure that the American athlete is not at his best on Saturday evening. Not injured. Not harmed. Nothing that could create an international incident. Simply ensure that his performance is compromised. Mentally. Emotionally. Psychologically. That he enters the ring distracted, unsettled, operating below his capacity. Volkov understood. This was not an assassination. This was not even sabotage in the traditional sense. This was psychological warfare, subtle, deniable, effective. The kind of operation that left no fingerprints, no evidence, no trail that could be followed back to the 19th floor of the Hotel Ukraina. For this operation, Volkov had selected his best agent. Not his most experienced. Not his most decorated. His best. Dmitry Sergeyevich Komarev. 29 years old. Born in Leningrad to a family of musicians, his father a cellist in the Mariinsky Theater Orchestra, his mother a piano teacher at the conservatory. Dmitry had inherited their sensitivity, their ability to read emotion, their understanding of the frequencies at which human beings vibrate. But he had been recruited by the KGB at 19, pulled from his second year at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, identified by a talent spotter who recognized in this quiet, perceptive young man a gift that could not be taught. Empathy. Specifically, the ability to simulate empathy so convincingly that the target could not distinguish it from the real thing. Dmitry had been trained in the Red Banner Institute, the KGB's elite academy for intelligence officers. Languages, he spoke English with a flawless American accent, French, German, Arabic. Tradecraft, surveillance, counter-surveillance, dead drops, brush passes, all the mechanical skills of espionage. But his specialty was human intelligence. Getting close to people. Understanding what they needed, what they feared, what they loved, what would break them. He had operated in 3 countries under deep cover. He had turned 2 Western intelligence officers and compromised a NATO communications network. He had never failed an assignment. He had also never slept through a night without dreaming of his father playing Shostakovich in an empty apartment, the music echoing off walls that grew thinner every year, and he had never fully silenced the voice in his head that told him that every relationship he built was a lie, every connection a manipulation, every moment of apparent humanity a tool in service of a state that viewed humanity itself as a resource to be exploited. But these were thoughts that Dmitry Komarev kept locked in a compartment of his mind that he opened only in the darkest hours of the night, when the city was silent and the walls of his apartment seemed to close in and the face of every person he had ever deceived looked back at him from the darkness. During the day, he was an operative. During the day, he had a mission. Colonel Volkov briefed him at 6 in the morning, 3 days before the exhibition match. The briefing took place in the suite on the 22nd floor, which had been swept for listening devices by Volkov's own team. A precaution that was ironic given that the hotel itself was one enormous listening device, every room wired, every phone tapped, every conversation recorded and filed in the vast archives of Soviet surveillance. "Your assignment is Muhammad Ali," Volkov said, sliding a file across the desk. Dmitry opened it. The photograph on top showed Ali at a press conference, his mouth open, his eyes alive, his hand raised in a gesture that was simultaneously aggressive and playful. Even in a still photograph, the man radiated energy. "You will make contact tonight," Volkov continued. "The cover is room service. The 19th floor staff has been briefed. You will deliver his evening meal at 9:30 precisely. His security detail consists of 2 men, both of whom will be in the adjacent room at that hour. The American delegation has accepted our hospitality protocols, which means they've agreed to unarmed security within the hotel. Volkov lit a cigarette. The match of the lighter was the loudest sound in the room. Your objective is psychological destabilization. You have 48 hours. I want him distracted, unsettled, questioning himself. I want him to enter that ring on Saturday night at 70% capacity. Not injured. Not drugged. Not threatened. Simply diminished. How? That is why I chose you, Dmitri. Because you will find the way. Every man has a frequency at which he can be disrupted. Find Ali's frequency. Dmitri studied the file for 12 hours. He read every transcript, every psychological profile, every intelligence report. He watched footage of Ali's fights on a small projector in a secure viewing room, studying not the boxing but the moments between rounds, the press conferences, the interactions with trainers, with opponents, with strangers. He was looking for the crack. Every person had one. The place where the public self and the private self didn't quite align. The gap between the performance and the reality. In most people, this crack was easy to find: vanity, insecurity, addiction, loneliness. But Ali was different. Ali's public self and private self seemed to operate in unusual harmony. The man who shouted, "I am the greatest," appeared to genuinely believe it, not as an act, not as a marketing strategy, but as a statement of experienced reality. This made him extremely difficult to destabilize through conventional means. Flattery wouldn't work because Ali was immune to it, having received more of it than any athlete in history. Intimidation wouldn't work because Ali had faced down the United States government and hadn't blinked. Seduction wouldn't work because Ali's religious convictions, whatever one thought of them, appeared genuine. But Dmitri found something. It was buried in the psychological profiles, mentioned almost as an afterthought by a Soviet sports psychologist who had clearly not understood what he had observed. The note read, "Subject displays heightened emotional response when confronted with suffering in others, particularly children. Possible sentimentality that may constitute vulnerability." Dmitri read this note several times. Then he closed the file and sat in silence for a long time, thinking. At 9:27 on Thursday evening, Dmitri Komarev put on the white jacket of a Hotel Ukraina room service waiter. He checked his appearance in the mirror, adjusted his bow tie, practiced the slightly nervous expression of a young hotel employee who had been told he would be serving the most famous man in the world. He loaded the cart with Ali's dinner, a meal that had been specially prepared according to the dietary requirements provided by the American delegation. Grilled chicken, rice, steamed vegetables, fresh fruit, orange juice. He pushed the cart to the service elevator, rode it to the 19th floor, and walked down the corridor to room 1914. He knocked 3 times. There was movement inside. Footsteps. Then the door opened, and Dmitri Komarev found himself looking at Muhammad Ali. The first thing that struck him was the size. Ali was bigger in person than he appeared on television or in photographs. Not just taller, though he was tall, but broader, more present, as if he occupied more space than his physical dimensions should have allowed. He was wearing a white bathrobe, hotel issue, and his feet were bare on the carpet. His face was relaxed, his eyes curious, his expression carrying the particular quality of alertness that Dmitri had seen in very few people, the awareness of someone who notices everything and reveals nothing. "Room service," Dmitri said in accented English. The accent was carefully calibrated, Russian enough to be authentic, clear enough to be easily understood. Ali stepped aside. Come in, come in." His voice was different in person. On television, it was loud, theatrical, designed to fill arenas and dominate press conferences. In a hotel room, at 9:30 in the evening, it was quieter, warmer, with a musical quality that the microphones never quite captured. Dmitri wheeled the cart into the room and began setting the small table by the window. His hands were steady. His movements were efficient but slightly nervous, exactly as a real room service waiter would be in the presence of a global celebrity. Ali sat on the edge of the bed and watched him. You nervous, kid? Dmitri looked up, performed a passable impression of embarrassment. A little, sir. You are very famous in Soviet Union. Ali smiled. I'm famous everywhere. That's my curse and my blessing. He said it without arrogance. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the matter-of-factness of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by his own fame. Dmitri finished setting the table. He lifted the covers from the dishes, arranged the silverware, poured the orange juice. Every gesture was an opportunity to observe. The room. Ali's belongings. The positions of furniture. The location of the telephone. The door connecting to the adjacent room where his security team was stationed. As he worked, he was also implementing the first phase of his approach. Not the disruption. Not yet. The foundation. Building rapport. Becoming a person in Ali's eyes, not just a waiter but an individual, someone worth remembering, someone worth talking to. Sir, Dmitri said, pausing as if gathering courage. May I ask you something? Ali was already moving toward the table, eyeing the food with the practical interest of an athlete who viewed meals as fuel. Sure. Is it true what they say? That you refused to fight in the war? Which war? Vietnam. Ali sat down. His expression shifted subtly. Not defensive. Not guarded. Reflective. That's true. Why? Dmitri asked the question with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. In reality, it was a carefully placed key, designed to open a door that Dmitri would walk through over the next 48 hours. Ali looked at him for a long moment. The gaze was penetrating in a way that made Dmitri, despite all his training, feel momentarily exposed. Because war is wrong, Ali said simply. Killing people who never did anything to you is wrong. Doesn't matter what flag you're carrying when you do it. Dmitri nodded slowly, as if absorbing wisdom from a teacher. Then he said something that was not in his plan. Something that came from the compartment in his mind that he was supposed to keep locked. In my country, he said quietly, we are also told to fight. Told who to hate. Told who is the enemy. Sometimes I wonder if the enemy is really the person they point at or if the enemy is the pointing itself. Ali stopped chewing. He put down his fork and looked at Dmitri with an intensity that had nothing to do with curiosity and everything to do with recognition. What's your name, kid? Dmitri hesitated. This was the moment. The alias was ready, a common Russian name, a simple backstory, a character designed to be sympathetic and forgettable. But something happened. Something that Dmitri Komarev had not experienced in 9 years of intelligence work. He told the truth. Dmitri, he said. My name is Dmitri. Ali extended his hand across the table. Sit down, Dmitri. Have some food with me. I can't, sir. I'm working. I'll tell them you were slow because I talked too much. Ali grinned. Nobody will argue with that. It's the most believable excuse in the world. Dmitri sat. He didn't eat, but he sat. And for the next 3 hours, in a hotel room in Moscow, in the middle of the Cold War, a man who had been sent to break Muhammad Ali found himself being broken instead. Not by force. Not by confrontation. By something far more dangerous. Conversation. Ali talked. He talked about Louisville, about growing up black in a country that told him he was less than human. He talked about his father, a sign painter who drank too much and dreamed too little. He talked about the bicycle that was stolen when he was 12, and the police officer who taught him to box because he wanted to fight the thief, and how that single moment of childhood rage had redirected the entire course of his life. He talked about changing his name, about finding his faith, about the day he refused induction and knew, with absolute certainty, that he was sacrificing everything he had built. He talked about the 3 years of exile, the silence that followed the noise, The emptiness that came when the crowds disappeared and the phone stopped ringing and he was left alone with the question that every famous person eventually faces: who am I without the thing that made me famous? He talked about fear. This surprised Dmitri more than anything else. Muhammad Ali, the man who claimed to be the greatest, who had stared down Sonny Liston and George Foreman and the entire United States government, talked about being afraid. "I'm afraid every day," Ali said. His voice had dropped to a register that Dmitri suspected very few people had ever heard. Every single day. Afraid of what? Afraid of not being enough. Afraid that the greatest is just a word and underneath it there's a man who doesn't know if he deserves it. Afraid that one day I'll wake up and the voice that tells me I can do anything will be silent and I'll be left with the voice that tells me I'm nothing. The room was very quiet. Outside, the Moscow wind hammered against the windows. Inside, two men sat across a small table covered with the remains of a meal neither of them was eating, separated by language, culture, ideology, history, and every artificial boundary that human beings construct to keep each other at distance, and none of those boundaries mattered. Because Dmitri recognized what Ali was describing. He recognized it because he lived it. Every day. Every night. The fear of being nothing without the role. The terror of the silence that comes when the performance stops. The suspicion that the self is not a solid thing but a collection of masks, and that behind the last mask there might be nothing at all. He wanted to tell Ali this. He wanted to say, "I understand, I am also wearing a mask, I am also afraid of what's underneath." But he couldn't. Because telling Ali the truth would mean revealing the lie, and revealing the lie would mean the end of everything, his career, his freedom, possibly his life. So he said something else instead. Something that was true without being the truth. In my country, we are taught that fear is weakness. That a real man feels nothing. That emotion is the enemy of duty. Ali shook his head. That's the biggest lie any government ever told its people. Fear isn't weakness. Fear is information. It tells you where the edge is. The only people who feel nothing are the ones who've stopped being human. They talked about Ali's children. About how he worried that his daughters would grow up in a world that judged them by their skin before their character. About how his son would carry the weight of a famous name and have to decide whether it was a gift or a burden. About the guilt of a father who spent too much time being Muhammad Ali and not enough time being dad. Then Ali asked Dmitri about his family. The question hit Dmitri like a physical blow. Not because it was aggressive, but because it was genuine. Because Ali wasn't asking as a conversational formality. He was asking because he wanted to know. Because in the space of 3 hours, the heavyweight champion of the world had decided that this Russian room service waiter was a person worth knowing, worth caring about, worth listening to. Dmitri's cover story included a family. A fictional wife named Natasha. Fictional parents in a fictional apartment in a fictional neighborhood. He had memorized the details, rehearsed the anecdotes, prepared the emotional beats that would make the fiction convincing. But when he opened his mouth, the fiction wouldn't come. "My father is a cellist," Dmitri heard himself say. "He plays in the orchestra at the Mariinsky Theater in Leningrad. Shostakovich, mostly. When I was small, he would practice at home, late at night, after my mother and I were supposed to be asleep. I would lie in bed and listen to the music coming through the walls. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard." He paused. "I haven't seen my father in 4 years." Ali was quiet. He didn't ask why. He didn't push. He simply waited, with the patience of a man who understood that some silences are not empty but full of things that need time to find their way to the surface. "My mother writes to me," Dmitri continued. "Letters that have been read by other people before I receive them. I write back, and my letters are read by other people before she receives them. We communicate through a filter of surveillance, and over the years the filter has become so thick that I'm not sure our words reach each other anymore. I'm not sure the person she writes to is me. I'm not sure the person who writes back is her." Ali reached across the table and placed his hand on Dmitri's wrist. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate, that Dmitri flinched. In 9 years of intelligence work, no one had ever touched him with genuine kindness. Manipulation, yes. Threat, yes. Professional. Contact, yes. But not this. Not the simple, human act of one person reaching out to another because they recognized pain. You missed them, Ali said. It wasn't a question. Dmitri nodded. He didn't trust his voice. Then go home, Ali said. Visit them. Hold your father. Listen to him play. Life is too short and too uncertain to let distance and duty steal the people you love. Dmitri almost laughed. The absurdity of it. The heavyweight champion of the world, the man he had been sent to psychologically destroy, was giving him life advice. Was seeing through every layer of training and cover and professional detachment to the human being underneath. Was touching the wound that Dmitri had spent years pretending didn't exist. It's not that simple, Dmitri said. It's never simple, Ali replied. Simple is for people who don't have the courage to deal with complicated. You don't strike me as a man who lacks courage. You don't know me. Ali smiled. I know enough. I know you're sitting here talking to me when you could have left hours ago. I know you asked real questions and listened to real answers. I know you miss your father so much that your voice changes when you talk about him. And I know that whatever is keeping you from him is eating you alive. Dmitri stared at this man. This impossible man. This man who saw through walls and read souls and refused to accept the surface of anything when the depth was available. And in that moment, Dmitri Komarev made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He would not complete the mission. He could not complete the mission. Not because he was incapable. Not because he had been outmaneuvered or detected. But because in 3 hours of conversation, Muhammad Ali had done something that no training, no ideology, no amount of professional discipline could defend against. He had treated Dmitri like a human being. And in doing so, he had reminded Dmitri that he was one. It was past 1 in the morning when Dmitri finally stood to leave. The food on the table had long since gone cold. The orange juice sat untouched, a thin film forming on its surface. The window showed nothing but darkness and the distant lights of a city that never fully slept because sleep, like privacy, like freedom, was something the state monitored and controlled. Dmitri, Ali said as the young man moved toward the door. Dmitri stopped but didn't turn around. Whatever it is you're really doing here, I hope you find what you're looking for. Dmitri's hand was on the door handle. His back was to Ali. His eyes were closed. For a long moment, neither man moved. I'm a waiter, Dmitri said. His voice was barely audible. Ali's response carried the warmth of a man who had spent his entire life recognizing lies because he understood that lies were just truths that were afraid to show their face. Sure you are, kid. Sure you are. Come back tomorrow night. Same time. We'll have tea. Dmitri opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The fluorescent lights were harsh after the warm glow of Ali's room. He walked to the service elevator, pressed the button, waited. When the doors opened, he stepped inside, pressed the button for the 22nd floor, and as the elevator began its ascent, Dmitri Komarev, agent of the Committee for State Security, leaned against the wall and pressed his palms against his eyes and did something he had not done since the day he was recruited 9 years earlier. He wept. The next morning, Dmitri filed his report with Colonel Volkov. The report was a masterpiece of omission. Contact established. Rapport developed. Subject displays expected psychological patterns. Recommend continued engagement tonight for maximum effect prior to Saturday match. Volkov read the report, nodded, asked no questions. This was the advantage of being considered the best. Nobody second-guessed your methods. Nobody asked to see behind the curtain. Nobody suspected that the puppet had cut its own strings. That evening, Dmitri returned to room 1914. This time he didn't bring a room service cart. He brought tea. Russian tea, strong and black, served in the traditional glass holders with metal handles that burned your fingers if you weren't careful. Ali opened the door in the same white bathrobe. His face lit up when he saw Dmitri, the genuine, unguarded pleasure of a man who had been expecting a friend and was happy to see him arrive. "My man," Ali said. "You came back. I brought tea. Real Russian tea." Ali stepped aside. "You know what? I've been drinking that orange juice they give me, and it tastes like it was squeezed by a machine that hates oranges. Tea sounds perfect." They sat by the window again. Dmitri prepared the tea with the careful ritual he had learned from his grandmother, warming the glasses, measuring the leaves, timing the steep. Ali watched with genuine interest, the curiosity of a man who found beauty in precision regardless of the context. This time, Dmitri talked more. Not about the mission. There was no mission anymore, not in any meaningful sense. He talked about his life. About growing up in Leningrad, about the white nights of summer when the sun barely set and the city existed in a perpetual golden twilight. About skating on the Neva River in winter, the ice so thick you could drive trucks across it, which people occasionally did. About his mother's hands on the piano keys, how they seemed too small to produce the sounds they produced, how music in his family was not entertainment but language, the way they spoke when words weren't enough. Ali listened the way he did everything, with total commitment. He didn't interrupt. He didn't redirect the conversation toward himself. He simply received what Dmitri offered, holding it with the care of someone who understood that when a person shares their story, they are sharing something irreplaceable. Then Ali told Dmitri about the night before the foreman fight. The rumble in the jungle. Kinshasa, Zaire. October 1974. "Everybody thought I was going to die," Ali said. His voice was different when he talked about this. Quieter. More internal. Not literally die. But get destroyed. Foreman was a monster. 40 fights. 37 knockouts. He had dismantled Frazier, who had beaten me. He had dismantled Norton, who had broken my jaw. The math didn't work. Every expert, every analyst, every person who understood boxing said the same thing. Ali has no chance. Ali is going to get hurt. Ali might not walk out of that ring. And you know what? They were right. About the math. About the logic. About every rational argument for why I should have lost that fight. But they were wrong about one thing. They were wrong about what matters in a fight. Dmitri leaned forward. "What matters?" Ali tapped his chest. "This. Not the muscle. Not the heart that pumps blood. The other heart. The one that decides whether you stand or fall. Whether you keep going when everything, every nerve, every cell, every voice in your head is screaming at you to stop." He paused. "The night before the foreman fight, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed in my hotel room in Kinshasa and I was afraid. Genuinely afraid. Not of Foreman. Not of losing. Afraid that I had miscalculated. That my plan, the plan nobody knew about, the plan I hadn't told my trainers or my corner or anyone, would fail. And if it failed, it wouldn't just be a loss. It would be destruction. What was the plan?" Ali smiled. "To let him hit me." Dmitri stared. The rope-a-dope. The most famous strategy in boxing history. The plan that Ali had conceived in secret and executed in Kinshasa, leaning against the ropes, covering up, letting George Foreman, the most powerful puncher in heavyweight history, unleash everything he had, round after round, until the punches had nothing left behind them and the monster had become a man and the man had become exhausted and the exhausted man met a right hand that he no longer had the energy to avoid and fell. "I planned to let the hardest puncher alive hit me as many times as he wanted," Ali said, "until he couldn't hit anymore. And then I planned to knock him out." "That's insane," Dmitri said, forgetting his role entirely, speaking as one human being to another. Ali laughed. The sound filled the room like music. That's what everyone said. Before and after. But here's what they don't understand. It wasn't insane. It was faith. Not faith in God, although I had that too. Faith in the truth. I knew the truth about Foreman. I knew he couldn't sustain that output. I knew his power came from anger, and that anger burns fast. I knew that if I could survive the fire, the man behind the fire would be standing there empty, with nothing left. And I would be standing there full. Dmitri absorbed this in silence. He was thinking about his own fire. About the KGB. About the state. About the system that had consumed his youth, his relationships, his identity, and left him sitting in a Moscow hotel room pretending to be someone he wasn't, talking to a man who was more honest with a stranger than Dmitri had been with anyone in a decade. Mohammed, Dmitri said. It was the first time he had used Ali's first name. The word felt important in his mouth. Heavy with significance he couldn't fully articulate. Tell me something. Anything. What do you want to know? How do you do it? How do you stay yourself when everything around you is trying to make you into something else? Ali was quiet for a long time. The tea cooled in their glasses. The wind outside had died down, and the silence of the Moscow night pressed against the windows like a living thing. You decide, Ali finally said. Every morning, you decide. You wake up and you decide who you are. Not who they tell you to be. Not who the world expects you to be. Not who your country or your job or your circumstances demand you to be. You decide. And then you spend the rest of the day defending the decision against every force that tries to take it away from you. Dmitri's eyes burned. He blinked. And what if you've spent so long being someone else that you've forgotten who you actually are? Ali leaned forward. Then that's the fight. The real fight. Not in a ring. Not against another man. Against the forgetting. Against the years of pretending. Against the lies that have become so familiar they feel like truth. He placed his hand on Dmitri's shoulder. The weight of it was extraordinary. Not physical weight. Moral weight. The weight of a man who had carried the expectations of millions and had not been crushed. You're not a waiter, Dmitri. Ali said it without accusation, without anger, without the triumph of someone who has caught another in a lie. He said it with the gentleness of a doctor delivering a diagnosis that the patient already knows. Dmitri's breath caught. How long have you known? Since you walked through the door last night. Ali's expression was utterly calm. Waiters don't ask about Vietnam. They don't have the eyes you have. And they don't carry sadness in their shoulders the way soldiers and spies do. You knew and you let me stay? I let you stay because you needed someone to talk to. And maybe I did too. Dmitri's training told him to deny, deflect, maintain the cover at all costs. His training told him that exposure was catastrophe, that the mission was compromised, that he needed to execute emergency protocols, leave the room, contact Volkov, regroup. But his training had been losing the argument for 2 days, ever since a man in a white bathrobe had told him to sit down and have some food and had listened to him talk about his father with the attention of someone who genuinely cared. They sent me to break you, Dmitri said. The words fell from his mouth like stones from a collapsing wall. To get inside your head before the fight. To make you distracted. Unfocused. Less than yourself. Ali nodded slowly. I figured it was something like that. And instead? Instead you broke me, Dmitri said. His voice cracked. Not my cover. Me. The person under the cover. You found him. I didn't even know he was still there. Ali stood up. He was enormous in the small room, a physical presence that seemed to reshape the space around him. He walked to Dmitri and did something that would have been unthinkable in any intelligence briefing, any operational manual, any scenario that Dmitri had ever trained for. He embraced him. Not a handshake. Not a pat on the back. A full embrace, the kind a father gives a son who has been lost and found, the kind that says, I see you, I know you, you are not alone. Dmitri broke. The walls he had built over 9 years, the compartments, the controls, the professional detachment that had allowed him to manipulate and betray without flinching. All of it collapsed in the arms of a man who had no reason to show him kindness and every reason not to. He wept. Not the controlled, silent tears of the elevator the night before. Real weeping. The kind that comes from a depth that most people never reach because reaching it requires the destruction of everything built on top of it. Ali held him. Said nothing. Let the storm run its course. When it passed, when Dimitri's breathing had steadied and his eyes had cleared, Ali stepped back and looked at him with an expression of such profound compassion that Dimitri felt, for the first time in years, that he was being seen. Not evaluated. Not assessed. Not analyzed for vulnerabilities. Seen. What happens now? Dimitri asked. His voice was raw, stripped of performance, carrying only what was real. Ali shrugged. Now you have a choice. You can go back to the people who sent you and tell them whatever you need to tell them. Or you can make a different choice. What different choice? Ali smiled. That's the thing about choices, brother. Nobody can make them for you. That's what makes them choices. Dimitri returned to the 22nd floor that night and filed his final report. Subject successfully destabilized. Psychological disruption achieved. Recommend no further contact. Operation complete. Volkov read the report, signed it, filed it. The operation was closed. The exhibition match took place on Saturday night as scheduled. 12,000 people filled the Luzhniki Palace of Sports. Soviet officials in the front rows. Diplomatic corps. Military officers. Athletes from across the communist bloc. Television cameras broadcasting to an estimated audience of 200 million people across the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Ali entered the ring to a reception that surprised everyone. The Soviet crowd, supposedly hostile, supposedly ideologically opposed to everything this American represented, rose to their feet and applauded. Not politely. Enthusiastically. Because Muhammad Ali transcended politics. He transcended borders. He transcended the cold calculations of superpowers and the rigid categories of ideology. He was something that both capitalism and communism claimed to produce but neither fully understood. A free man. Viktor Petrov fought bravely. He was strong. Disciplined, technically proficient, a product of the Soviet athletic system at its best. He landed several clean shots in the first 2 rounds. The Soviet crowd roared its approval. But by the 3rd round, it was over. Not through violence. Through mastery. Ali moved with a fluidity that seemed to belong to a different species. He slipped Petrov's punches with margins so small they defied measurement. He countered with combinations so fast that the television cameras, operating at standard frame rates, couldn't fully capture them. And when the final bell rang, everyone in the arena, Soviet and American, official and civilian, knew that they had witnessed something beyond sport. Ali won the decision unanimously. He embraced Petrov immediately, holding the Soviet fighter's hand up alongside his own, a gesture of respect that was not in the diplomatic script but was pure Ali. The crowd's ovation lasted 8 minutes. In the stands, in a seat near the back of the arena, Dmitry Komarov watched. He was wearing civilian clothes. He had told Volkov he was taking the evening off, a personal matter. Volkov hadn't questioned it. Best agents were allowed their eccentricities. Dmitry watched Ali dance in the ring, watched him raise Petrov's hand, watched him blow kisses to the Soviet crowd, and felt something stir in his chest that he had thought was dead. Hope. Not hope for anything specific. Not hope attached to a plan or an outcome. Just hope. The raw, unprocessed feeling that tomorrow might be different from today. That the prison of habit and duty and fear might have a door he hadn't noticed. That somewhere in the vast, cold architecture of his life, there was a room with a window that opened. 3 months later, Dmitry Komarov submitted his resignation from the KGB. The process was not simple. Resignations from Soviet intelligence were not accepted lightly. There were interviews, investigations, surveillance, threats both subtle and direct. But Dmitri had spent 9 years learning how the system worked, and he used that knowledge to navigate his exit with the same precision he had used to execute his missions. He was allowed to leave. Not cleanly. Not without consequences. He was placed on a watch list. His movements were monitored. His correspondence was intercepted. His career options were limited to positions that the state considered sufficiently insignificant. He became a translator at a state publishing house, converting English-language technical manuals into Russian. The work was tedious, repetitive, and entirely devoid of the adrenaline that had sustained him for nearly a decade. It was also honest. And for the first time in his adult life, Dmitri went home at the end of each day without having lied to anyone. He visited his father in Leningrad 6 weeks after his resignation. He took the overnight train, arrived at dawn, walked through streets he hadn't walked in 4 years. The apartment building looked smaller than he remembered. The stairwell smelled the same, cabbage and floor wax and the particular mustiness of old Soviet concrete. He knocked on the door. His father opened it. The man had aged. His hair was white now, his shoulders stooped, his hands, the cellist's hands that had once moved with such fluid precision, trembled slightly with a tremor that hadn't been there 4 years ago. Father and son stood in the doorway and looked at each other. No words. No embrace. Just two men measuring the distance that time and silence and the machinery of a totalitarian state had placed between them. Then his father stepped aside, and Dmitri walked into the apartment, and on the table in the small kitchen was a cello, and without speaking his father sat down and began to play. Shostakovich. The same piece Dmitri had listened to through the walls as a child. The same notes. The same phrasing. The same heartbreak and beauty and defiance that had been the soundtrack of his childhood. Dmitri sat in the kitchen chair and listened, and the tears came again, not the tears of the elevator or the hotel room but quieter tears, slower, the kind that come when something broken begins to heal and the healing itself is painful because it requires you to feel what you've been avoiding. When the music ended, his father looked at him. "Where have you been, Dima?" Dmitri considered the question. The honest answer was, lost. But that wasn't complete. He had been lost, yes. But he had also been found. In a hotel room in Moscow. By a man who fought with his fists for a living but whose greatest weapon was his heart. "I was away," Dmitri said. "But I'm home now." Years later, after the wall fell, after the Soviet Union collapsed, after the world reorganized itself along lines that would have been unimaginable in 1978, Dmitri Komarev emigrated to the United States. He settled in Louisville, Kentucky. Not by coincidence. He had one piece of unfinished business. He found Ali's address through public records. He wrote a letter. The letter took him 3 days to compose. It was the most honest thing he had ever written, more honest than any intelligence report, any personal diary, any correspondence with his family. In the letter, he told Ali everything. Who he was. Why he had been in that hotel room. What his mission had been. And what Ali had done to him, not the spy, not the operative, not the agent of a hostile government, but the man underneath all of those things. The man who missed his father. The man who had forgotten how to be human. The man who had been saved by a conversation over cold chicken and untouched orange juice. He mailed the letter on a Tuesday. On Thursday, his phone rang. The voice on the other end was older, slower, touched by the cruel hand of Parkinson's disease, but unmistakable. "Dmitri." The voice said. "My waiter." Ali's laugh came through the phone, diminished by illness but still carrying the warmth that had filled the hotel room in Moscow 20 years earlier. "I knew you'd find me eventually." They met the following week. Ali's home in Louisville was modest by celebrity standards. Clean, comfortable, filled with photographs and memorabilia but not ostentatious. Ali moved carefully now, his body betraying him in ways that would have been unthinkable in 1978. The tremor in his hands. The shuffle in his step. The speech that came slower, each word requiring effort that the young Ali would never have imagined. But his eyes were the same. Clear. Present. Seeing everything. They sat in Ali's living room. Lonnie, Ali's wife, brought tea. Real tea. When she left the room, Ali looked at Dimitri and smiled. "You look better," Ali said. "Than what?" "Than the man who walked into my hotel room pretending to be a waiter." Dimitri laughed. A real laugh. The kind he had relearned over the years, slowly, painfully, the way a person relearns to walk after a serious injury. "I was a terrible waiter." "You were a terrible spy too." Ali's eyes twinkled. "Good spies don't cry." "Then I was the worst spy in the history of the KGB." "No," Ali said. His voice softened. "You were the best human being in the KGB. That's why you couldn't stay." They talked for hours. About the years between. About Dimitri's father, who had died in 1991, 3 months before the Soviet Union itself expired. About Ali's fights, his victories, his defeats, his diagnosis, his slow, dignified surrender to a disease that was taking everything except the thing it couldn't touch, his spirit. As Dimitri was leaving, he stopped at the door and turned back. "Muhammad." "Yes." "That night in Moscow. When you held me. When you let me fall apart in your arms." "Why?" Ali was quiet for a moment. The tremor in his hand seemed to still, the way it sometimes did when something important required his full attention. "Because that's what you do when a man is drowning," Ali said. "You don't ask who sent him into the water. You don't ask what country he's from. You don't ask if he's your enemy. You reach out your hand and you pull him to shore. That's not politics. That's not strategy. That's being human." Dimitri nodded. His eyes were bright, but he didn't cry. He had done enough crying. Now was the time for something else. Gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "For saving my life." Ali shook his head slowly. "I didn't save your life, Dimitri. I just reminded you that you had one. You did the rest." Dimitri walked to his car, started the engine, and sat for a moment in Ali's driveway, looking at the modest house where the greatest fighter who ever lived was slowly losing the last fight no one wins. And he thought about Moscow. About snow falling sideways. About tea in glass holders. About a man in a white bathrobe who saw through every disguise because he understood that all disguises are just different ways of hiding from yourself. The spy who was sent to break Muhammad Ali. The man who was broken and remade by Muhammad Ali. The waiter who wasn't a waiter. The fighter who didn't fight with his fists. Moscow, 1978. 2 men. 1 mission that failed. 1 conversation that succeeded. And the truth that Ali spoke in every language, in every ring, in every room he ever entered. That the greatest victory is not over your opponent. It is over the lies that keep you from being who you really are. That's the story they never told. Not the boxing match. Not the diplomatic triumph. Not the Cold War spectacle. The story of a hotel room. A pot of tea. And the night Muhammad Ali defeated the KGB with nothing but the truth and the willingness to see a human being where everyone else saw an enemy. That's Muhammad Ali. That's who he was. Not the champion. The man. The one who reached across every border, every wall, every divide that human beings construct, and said, "Sit down. Have some tea. Tell me who you really are." And meant it. Every single time.